Hello and welcome to today's session, What's New in SYSPRO 8? Thank you for joining us. Just to check, can you hear me clearly and see my screen? If you can just raise your hand in the GoToWebinar panel. I see a few hands raised. Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us again. My name is Darshni Shah. I'm the K3 SYSPRO Product Manager, and I am delighted to have Nick Trevor, our Solutions Consultant, join us today.
Hello, everyone.
So in today's session, it's a continuation of a session we had last week where we talked about SYSPRO 8. The goal for today's session is really to bring you up to speed on what's been introduced since SYSPRO 8 was released. Now with SYSPRO 8, we've actually shifted the way that we're introducing releases. We've moved away from ports and we've moved towards releases. And as you can see, SYSPRO 8 was originally released in July 2018. Since then, we've actually had 4 additional releases: October, February, August, March. They traditionally will fall within the spring and autumn periods, or if you're a Canadian like me, you'll say fall. So spring and fall releases, traditionally what we're going to see, 2 releases going forward. We've already seen the 2020 R1 and 2020 R2 is currently slated for the fall of 2020. So what are we looking at? What I wanted to do is showcase some of the highlights. You would have already seen some of these in the previous presentation. With the initial release of 2018, after the first release, what we ended up with were improvements in the Avanti interface with the introduction of workspaces, as well as flow graphs that Nick very kindly showed. We've had some changes in and around the architecture with some dashboards that were introduced, introduction of new functionality around forgotten passwords. In the mobility, we've introduced barcoding and password support. We've got machine learning and artificial intelligence on the digital platform, and some invoice term improvements as well as discount handling on the finance. I'm going to whiz through the next, but you get the idea of the different release features that are there. The next release was 2019 R1, and the highlights in there go all the way from the order picking cycle to multi-currency payments on the finance side, the first introduction of recall, as well as the next dashboard that was added in. 2019 R2, we had a whole slew of new functionality that was released that we didn't get a chance to talk about last time. The supply chain portal, return to supplier, cycle counting, request for quotes. Within Avanti, the ability to have help launched. Customization functionality was enhanced. On the finance side, K3, partnering with SYSPRO, introduced our solution for making tax digital to adhere to HMRC guidelines. On the digital side, we introduced the rules engine. And of course, in our latest release that's fresh off the press, we've improved on some warehousing functionality with the distribution. With cycle counting and order picking, we've introduced the concept of a lost and found warehouse. We've improved the Avanti interface. The architecture has also been augmented. Some additional changes were introduced on the recall side of manufacturing, and some further finance and digital improvements are there as well. So without further ado, let's jump into what's new in SYSPRO 8. With SYSPRO Avanti, we've been on a journey since the initial release, and it continues to be improved and added to with every single release. Avanti is SYSPRO's web version, and what we've done is add more and more programs that were already available in the traditional SYSPRO client that we're used to into the web interface. We've also improved the tailoring and power tailoring customization functionality within the web interface because, of course, it's a different platform. The way that we engage with it is different. And we've also looked to add new functionality. At this point, what I'd like to do is actually hand over to Nick to show us a little bit about some of the changes in there. So over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Darshni. Right, so, oops, I'm going to head on the slides, but we'll come back to that. Right, I'm going to go through some of the general changes in the Avanti interface so you get a good understanding of what possibilities there are. So I'm just going to log in as my user first and sign in. So the Avanti login has also been enhanced lately, so you've got your keep me signed in, which is useful. And also we talked last week about using pins to log in. Okay, so you'll notice straight away I'm loaded into my home screen. We talked a little bit about this last week. So I've got program tiles, and within workspaces, I can go into other various parts of my insight tiles, which also give you more programs and insights. Okay. Now, one thing SYSPRO have introduced recently is something called cards. Okay, you'll notice these already within the standard Avanti screens. So within inventory query, I have a card here on the left. If I go into a stock code, the card is automatically refreshed and it brings more information about the product to this particular card. Now, what SYSPRO have done, which is really great, is allow these to be built by yourself. So you can actually build these cards throughout the product so they can be called up in various stages, either by designing screens and adding it on because they're context aware based on the stock code or purchase order or sales order, or building them directly onto my home screen to give me insight-like behavior. So a card in itself, let's design one. So using the design card function, I get into the card designer. From here, I can give it a header. So I'm going to call this dispatch note totals. So it appears in the preview pane. And I'm going to select a widget. In here, you've got various different widgets. A carousel, for instance, will give you a next and previous button. The placeholders we're about to fill in. For this particular card, I'm going to do a simple table and remove my carousel, which is going to be 2 columns on 1 row. Now I need to assign fields to the card. Okay, so I can do this either through business object calls or a SQL query, which I find most useful. Now I've prepared one already, so you don't have to watch me write SQL. This is basically just a summary of the total value from my MDM master table. So cards do obviously require some technical knowledge in terms of writing SQL or using business objects to work with. So I'm going to just give it a test key field. So this is going to be my context field, which is my stock code. Against there, I can run it, and that will give me the available fields from the query, which I can drag onto my card. So I can put my value in, and I can put my stock code in. So I've got a very simple card. Now these could be a lot more complex, and they could look across a lot more different tables in SYSPRO to give you the right information. So once I've done that, I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to link it to the stock code itself and save. And I'm going to leave my card builder. I'm just going to quickly, to make this card available, I need to first log out and back in. Now I'm back in the screen. I can now go to see where this card might be available. So for example, my purchase order query, for I know has a list of stock codes. I can now begin to see, okay, should have been available there. Let me just double check that has been saved right. Could have been, can't see. That actually hasn't come up. Okay, I'll leave that, I'll park that for a second. But essentially these cards should be allowing me to render like you saw with the other cards once they're added. I should be able to pull them up like this. So my dispatch note totals would have been brought up as a card here, which means I can put them throughout the programs and get access from any list view, which is really powerful and useful. So that they are just one of the main new functions that they've brought in to Avanti. As an aside to insight into getting more information where you need it most.
It's always the joy of a live demo, isn't it, Nick?
It really is when it doesn't work, and you've did it a few times before and it worked fine. But what can you do? I probably didn't log out and back properly, probably enough. Okay, I'm going to go through the rules engine now, which I believe Darcy went through the other day when she talked about workflow. Now, the rules engine itself is a great alternative to SQL triggers. It's a lot safer than a SQL trigger because it won't necessarily cause grief on your applications should you have any syntax errors. as such a SQL trigger will, and it allows you to capture and do many other events that might not be possible through the likes of e-signatures or events in SYSPRO. And what is also great about them is they will always fire regardless whether it's e.net or through the front end SYSPRO. So I'm going to remember my alphabet now and get to my rules engine and go into the administrator. So SYSPRO will ship, and they'll be constantly adding to this list various templates for these rules. So as a sample one, the customer balance store will allow me to basically track the history of the current balance from the AR customer balance table. Now, why is that really useful? Now, if you've got any business intelligence systems or even Excel itself, you can then build a line graph or a line chart of a customer's balance history to see how it fluctuates. So that information then can be really useful as a business to understand, when are they likely to pay, and when are they likely to start going overdue on their terms. So you can do that with almost any field within SYSPRO's tables to then start tracking a history of it.
Do you know, that's a good point, Nick, because natively SYSPRO does keep a little bit of history on some of these values. But what you want to do is the trending analysis, what's changed month over month, year over year, period over year, period, quarter over quarter. That's really what you're talking about here, isn't it? The ability to track and start trending the analysis over a period of time.
Exactly, and in a uniform manner. If you say an e-signature log might not give you the data in the right format that you require, but this will give me just a simple log file of that particular field chain, which give me the complete trend, which I can then build into any application I see fit, which is really powerful.
Unlike a stored procedure, it's actually doing that seamlessly, so it's not interfering with what's happening, and it's firing in the background every single time without having a performance hit on any transactions being performed in SYSPRO.
Correct, yep. So unlike having to, unlike a SQL trigger, which might have to do that kind of thing, it's got the performance hit should be a lot more minuscule and won't also impact the front end application. I will say on the rules engine, it's a very powerful engine that sits on your server that is monitoring SQL constantly. So you do need to be wary if you are going to adopt it that you have the right architecture to support it. Okay, so there's some sample rules that ship with it. Let's look at some of the custom ones I've wrote already. So a very simple one. I've got one where tracks when a product class is changed against a stock code. Okay, so you can see here, I've got various actions that result against it. But first, before I go into that, I'm gonna look at the condition. So against the product class, I am set it up to look at the inventory master table on an update and where the new product class is not equal to the old product class. So when that condition is met, it'll fire these actions seamlessly in the background without interfering with my application. So a SQL trigger to do this might actually slow down SYSPRO, while the rules engine is multi-threaded. It won't actually happen. It will just happen seamlessly in the background. So you can see here I've got an email to myself, naturally. I've got a log file. So this is actually logging a text file out to my temp folder of the change. And I've got something called an Avanti notification, which will just notify whichever operator I want, in this case it's me, about the change. Okay, so let's have a little look at what that actually looks like when it happens. So I'm going to go into my stock code setup in Avanti. I'm going to go to my favorite A100, and I'm going to change this to a different product class. Okay. Actually, I'm going to put it to a more fitting one, mountain bikes. Okay, and once that I've done that, I will save. Okay, so the rules engine is obviously happening in the background on more of a polar, but so you can see now it's appeared. Product class has changed on A100. So within a few seconds of it happening, I am alerted that the change has happened. And that's just simply by using the rules engine. Not necessarily any coding was required in setting any of that up, just a bit of knowledge of the database underpinning SYSPRO. Within my notifications, I can now see and click into that if I define a program against the tile. A more advanced one, and I won't dwell on this one too much, is you can put this against perhaps the requisition system. So by analysing a table which tracks when a requisition is routed to another user, I can set up an action which sends the routed to user a notification of that requisition. So behind the scenes here, I've got the requisition number that will appear in the message, and then it will give me various details about the requisition itself. Now the operator doesn't need to be hard coded. I can take this value here and put it here to make sure it's dynamic, which will then pull the operator against that requisition user and send that one a notification instead. So these are really powerful little events that you can then start triggering in SYSPRO without having to worry about performance issues that you would with a SQL trigger or store procedure. And like I said before, these will be fire regardless of whether the event has happened in E.NET, so a business object call like in data switch, or SYSPRO front end, or even if you decided to update it in SQL itself, because of how it's architected, it'll always run. So you can see here, these are some previous transactions that I've had routed to me, which I can click on to actually load into other programs. Let's just set up another session. So really powerful and really versatile. I'll exit that now. Okay, so that's the rules engine in a nutshell. I'm going to minimize that. Now I want to talk a little bit about CMS in SYSPRO. So a lot of people might have full-blown CMS systems, but SYSPRO itself, it can come with a module called CMS, which gives you a lot of capability for contact tracking or activity posting, lead analysis, anything like that. Oh God, that. So I've set up a little workspace now for my contacts. So in Avanti now, I've got a contact query. So this is really useful because remember, Avanti is a web-based program, which means any remote workers can get access to this without having access necessarily to a laptop or a remote desktop or a VPN. They can get access to this. So if you've got sales reps on the road, they can begin to go into contact query to analyze information and post activities. So let's have a little look at what that looks like. So those who have contact management already, this screen will look slightly different. They have been rewritten to make it a bit more streamlined. So let's look at all my contacts in my system currently. So these are all my contacts against relevant customers. And I can go and click into myself here. I can see activities and I can see details. All these are obviously not very well filled in because it is a demo system. But essentially, what it allows a remote user to do is search for a particular contact that they want to visit, find the person, and then begin, when they do meet up, they can then start posting activities or even filling in extra information. So if you do find out the job title has changed, they can quickly edit it here without having to ring up the customer center back in the office to change. They've got all the access within Avanti. So I'm going to post an activity, but actually I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come out of here and go into contact details and post it as if it was a phone call. So by clicking on the phone call, it automatically fills in information for me. From here, I can add attendees, attachments, and more stuff onto the subject. By starting to fill in these, I can pull up my predefined subjects and use predictive search to fill that in quicker. And I can then give in follow-up flags and dates so it appears against the user to follow up on. So again, really powerful stuff. Once the activity is posted, you should see that I now have my new activity appearing in the list view against the user. And then from there, I can then begin to clear down the reminders once I've followed it up. So again, all of this same query is all available within standard SYSPRO front end, but with it being available in Avanti, it broadens the ability of CMS within SYSPRO to start, spanning it out across the business and getting more remote workers involved in actually capturing this information and helping you build up your sales pipeline. Last but not least, obviously, I can also put in a few tiles which drill straight into the activity postings for a lot more quicker and seamless posting of activities against my user, and then adding the attendees from the customer themselves. So that is CMS in Avanti in a nutshell. Darshini?
Thanks very much, Nick. I like the whistle-stop tour of some of the changes that we've added into Avanti. Hopefully this builds the picture of some of the new functionality that continues to be added in. One of the key things to remember is, as Nick mentioned, the contact query looks slightly different in Avanti than it does in SYSPRO. And the reason for that is we want to make it sure that it's more intuitive for the users to use. So some things will shift a little bit because they need to be more engaged, especially if you're looking at it on a smaller device on a tablet and you're accessing it from there. The screens need to be able to be user-friendly, and that's what you're seeing in there. So fundamentally with Avanti, what we're looking to achieve is greater productivity. Nick flipped back and forth between the workspaces to allow you to see easily and at a glance all of the programs, the tiles, the insights that you need to do for that particular element of your role, because we know that everyone wears multiple hats. We're looking at the security side of it, single sign-on, the ability to go ahead and have multi-factor authentication. We're looking for efficiency gains, and fundamentally, we're still making sure that we're making the system as usable as possible. So hopefully you've got a little bit of a tidbit of some of the new functionality. It's important to note that the card builder functionality is only available within Avanti, as is the rules engine. When you go in and configure that, even though it fires from all of the different elements of SYSPRO, it is something that you configure directly from within Avanti, because that's where it made sense to go ahead and set it up in the first place, that configuration front-end element of it. So the other thing that we've also looked to improve on the customer engagement, not just on the contact query that Nick's talked about, is the ability to go ahead and engage with customers should a complaint come in, should you be unfortunate enough to have a complaint. And rather than me talk a lot about what the customer complaints are, what I'll do is actually I'll let Nick continue doing the hard work and have him show you what's available from a customer complaint system. So back to you, Nick. We'll have to unmute you, Nick.
You are completely right.
That's great.
Classic.
I can hear you now.
Those who are wide-eyed would have noticed, I was just saying that outside of my room then, a bit strange with no one listening, that I've got complaint tiles on my right-hand side. So within SYSPRO 8, SYSPRO have introduced a complaint system for better tracking of complaints back to sales orders or invoices for richer analysis, and also so you can react quicker to these things that are happening about the products. So I've got tiles set up. What I'm actually going to go through is the complaint system within SYSPRO itself. So against my user, Jez, I've named him fittingly for the customer service department role. I've got my program tiles to get me into my customer complaint system. So let's have a little look at what that looks like. So when a customer ring up, I can then start adding a complaint against their customer code. I can fill in the basic information, give it a status of new, and I've got severity levels. So based on the type of complaint they're making, whether a sales rep has cursed in front of them or it's an issue with the product, you might need to give it a different level of severity. So in this one, I'm going to give it high, which means it should be turned around in 1 day. The other one's 2 or 3 days instead. So give it a subject. So I run a bicycle company, which also sells garden sheds. I'm going to give this a broken bike frame as the subject, and I'm then going to fill in more information about the frame itself and the stock code that they've reported. I can apply richer notes and also fill in dates if it was predated when I was actually filling it in, and link it to also a sales order and invoice document, which I can then report on. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and save that now. It tells me it's been captured successfully, and now it becomes an inbuilt-in workflow. So like requisitions, this has its own workflow that you can set up, which then allows me to assign it to groups. So I've only got 2 groups set up. So I've got my complaints level 1, which happens to be ran by the same guy I'm running it as. So I'm going to assign it to Jez again, just so I don't have to log out and back in. And then what that will do, it should actually fire a built-in email. So if you actually notice within, oops, if you notice when I was actually assigning that complaint, let's go into that for some reason. I don't know why. Never mind. I would add email templates at the top, which allows me to fill in emails against this user or complaint. So when it gets assigned, I can then fill in all the predefined information, which then tells me what happened, why the complaint was raised, who has raised it, and what the severity of it is, which can go to the next engineering department per se to then escalate should it be needed. So you'll notice on the left, I've got my assigned complaints, which are those against my user, and I've also got complaints which have been escalated, which might impact the business more if they're not addressed in a quick fashion. So against my entry itself, I've also used some power tailoring to go into recall. So as a complaints person, you might want to actually say, okay, I've got a broken bicycle frame, but there could be a wider impact. So only one customer's complaining about that at the minute, but if this was going to lead to injury or anything else, you might be considering a recall on top of that. So let's have a quick look at my recall query. So I'm going to search for the lot number, which hopefully the customer has supplied. If not, you can find it through other means. I'm going to have a little review of this particular lot that's been sold to them. Okay, straight away, I can see the sales order it came from, my customer 1, the sales order 1580, but I can also now begin to see other impacted jobs and lot numbers. So while we sold a lot 100 on, sold a stock code lot 100 on lot 912, this had components with these lot numbers against it, but my lot 100 999 also had some of the shared components. So my bicycle frame here, which is the one that is in question, by clicking on my affected jobs and blowing that out, I can actually see that this same lot was used amongst the same job, which means I need to actually create a recall not only for this particular lot number, but also lot 999. Now, the whole benefit of using this selection review is that I can quickly blow into that information within seconds. I can understand the problems that this one complaint has caused. So this complaint has driven me down into this component, which is the subject matter, and told me other items that I need to recall. And then within that, I can actually look at any other sales orders where that has been sold to. I'm fortunate in this case that this is the only customer I have sold it to. But should it be a lot larger recall, you might have many lists of customers that you need to contact. Okay, so now I've got my complaint. I'm just going to finish this through so you get a better understanding of the programs that have become available. So against here, I can do various things like routing the complaint to a different user and giving it a different reason for routing. So by using this, I'm actually going to escalate it. So I'm going to route it to a higher up department and escalate it as a possible recall. Again, I'm going to use the same user for simplicity, but that would be an engineering user or someone much higher up that runs the department. And I'm going to save. Again, an email would have been triggered and it's fallen off this list at the minute because it's not, when you escalate, it doesn't get assigned. Okay, so I'm going to use my review just to bring that back in. And down here, I can then assign it to the right user. Okay, from that, I just want to quickly close it off. So in here, I can now close it off once it's been addressed. So you can see everything that I have done has tracked it underneath. So all the tracking about this complaint and its history is provided in a full audit trail. So when it's assigned, when it's routed, or even if I just want to post a comment against the complaint, it's fully tracked, which means I can then analyze that information later on. In this case, no issue was found. The customer was actually just lying to me. They broke it with a hammer themselves. And again, I am then given with a closed status, and then the full history is tracked. Should have that gone into a recall, I could have used my actual full recall quarantine. So we spoke about recall last week, allowing me to bring in those lots from the selection criteria and actually quarantine them. So if I were to do a full recall, I could have brought the bicycle frame in question into the recall and also the 2 parent lots that we saw. So I've done my analysis or upfront already when I looked at it before. So we know there's a problem with this particular lot being the bicycle frame. And we know that lot was also used on both of these parent parts. So they are the problematic parts that I need to bring in. Once it's brought into my quarantine, because it's a full recall, this will actually allow me to put it as a reason code and put it on hold. Simply by doing that now, I've completely locked down that lot, so no more sales or movements or anything can be found or completed until I have completed my recall, which might mean contacting the customers to bring it back and crediting them. It might mean scrapping off the part number should there be a fault with it. So within this program, I can do all of those particular actions. I can scrap it, or I can actually go in and start releasing it should I want to. Oops. Let's do product recall maintenance. So within here, I can then start to decide to scrap or set it for inspect, which I can then report on later on. Obviously, scrap requires that I have a quantity on hand for that to work. I'm going to leave it quarantine for now and just conclude that there. Okay, Darshni.
Thanks, Nick. Just before you jump back, if you wouldn't mind going back into SYSPRO for me, we've
Sure
got
thing.
a quick question that I think you can answer quickly for me. The question is, where's the customer complaints on the program menu? So before you jump in and show that, what I'm going to do is actually just make sure that you're on 2019 release 2, because that's when the functionality was released. So unless you get to that version, you won't see it on the menu. And then, Nick, aha.
Yep. So you can see on the left-hand corner, I'm on R1 for 2020, and I will show you where it is by being lazy and typing in the search. But so it's in the contact management, and you'll find that there's a new subfolder in contact management called Customer Complaint System. And within there, you have the various programs. Okay, you've got your complaint query, your various purges that come with programs, your entry. And what I find useful, if those that don't, always include your browses, which gives you this browse menu. And from there, you get your browse and complaints, which actually allows you to do a lot of different things by right-clicking, which is really quite a useful little hint. Otherwise, you'd have to go into the query and then browse from there, which doesn't give you the right click that you so desire. You can only click onto it. So that's where it's found. And then in Avanti itself, you'll find that it should be within the ribbon bar and within the CMS in a very similar pattern. Does that answer the question?
I believe it does. Thanks, Nick.
No worries.
So what we're going through is some improvements around customer engagement. As Nick went through the customer complaints, obviously what it will do is increase your customer responsiveness. I know that a number of different customers already have a process in place and a nice flow within the business on engaging with any incoming issues coming in from either phone calls, returns, emails. But what this does is it allows you to systematically capture that within SYSPRO and start looking at related information, as Nick said, upstream and downstream, all of the associated information with orders that were related to this, And what Nick also showcased today was some very clever technology that he's used to go ahead and link that to the recall management. Natively in the first iteration, this is not something that SYSPRO's done. We've released the customer complaints, but Nick's actually added in the ability to link the two because that made sense for the business scenario he wanted to go through today. The other thing we have, of course, is compliance. As we talked about with the recall, if you're making sure that you're capturing that not just at a complaint level, but also looking with your escalation path on what else may be affected, we need to make it easy and seamless for you to do so. Fundamentally, if you're catching them early enough in this cycle and any complaints get caught in action right away, you know that you're improving products. And as we all know in business, and we've been doing this long enough, fundamentally, if we do this effectively, the ability to manage customer complaints has the ability to go ahead and strengthen your market stance. And the way that you deal with that is actually a competitive advantage. We also looked at the recall functionality that has been added in. And fundamentally, we looked at the recall within the last release, within the last version. What's happened since the initial release of the recall module is you've seen new functionality being added in. So one of the things that Nick showed beyond the recall quarantining, the selections review, within the selections review, we've actually added in the functionality to see sales orders. We're continuing to expand that functionality as well. So at a high level, that's what we've done from a customer service perspective. Supply chain is something that I keep hearing about in the news, and the flexibility of supply chain today, the importance of fit, and how it is a strategic factor. You know, Make UK talks a lot about what's happening within the world today and around trying to buy locally and so on. But fundamentally, the supply chain is an important part of the business, and SYSPRO has actually been working on improving what we already offer within the market space. You know, we've got fantastic functionality when it comes to identifying what we've got on hand, identifying with our MRP what we need, how quickly we can get it, what our lead times are. But we've continued to expand on that and build out. Some of the technologies that we've added on to on the supply chain side of things, we've introduced a sourcing policy, the ability to request quotes when you're out in a tendering process, a portal for your suppliers to start interacting with you. We introduced that with the last release, as well as the ability to return to suppliers. So we just looked at customer complaints when we've got incoming complaints, but what if you in turn have to return that back to your source? How do you manage that and improve that? Again, rather than listen to me talk, what I'm going to do is hand over to Nick to showcase some of this functionality that we've talked about. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Darshni. I've unmuted myself this time successfully. Right, so what SYSPRO introduced is something called request for quote, which ties into the requisition system inside SYSPRO. So request for quote is basically putting your requisition out to tender, so they can then, suppliers can then start engaging with you and giving you a price back and a lead time for that particular item. So this enriches your engagement with your suppliers. Okay, and on top of that, SYSPRO giving you a portal which allows your suppliers to log in and actually enter that information, rather than someone like yourself having to do that front end, which you can also do. So what I'm going to do on my current user, I'm going to go through the menu system and look at my particular requisitions that I have available to me that I might want to put out to tender. So in my requisition system, I'll look at my entry, and against this particular user, I've got various requisitions that are currently open, okay, that I am the holder for. Now, I'm going to just start having a look at this. Let's have a look at 224. Currently, I want two. It's on hold at the minute, so let's do 223. Everything looks good to go. It's B100, quantity of 1. I've got a price at the minute is 20. What I'm actually going to do is approve that for RFQ. Okay, so that'll now set the status as ready for an RFQ. So I'm going to go ahead now and start filling in the information to send that out to the particular suppliers. So you'll notice underneath the requisition system, there's a new sub file for the request for quote. From here, there's a review program, which I can use to see anything that I can then tender out to my suppliers. So in this particular case, I'm going to select the requisition I was after. So this supports stocked and non-stocked items. So if you are buying non-stocked, you can also use the same process, which makes it a lot more useful. I can then create my RFQ off the back of that. So from
So you
here,
mean if I'm going out to tender for paper clips, I can do that as well?
of course you can. You've got to get a good price on those paper clips.
Absolutely. I'm running low on all that paper clip chain I'm making. Thanks, Nick.
Exactly. Without being able to go to the office, you can't raid the cupboard anymore. So from here, I'm going to enter my suppliers that I want to tender for it and accept and close. You can give it a reference and a more detailed description. And then what's important is that you have to supply a closing date. Now, this means it gives the supplier every opportunity to fill it in. So it's not necessarily a first come, first serve. You can only action your requisition after the closing date. So you need to be, fair but strict on these. Otherwise, you can't progress your requisition further until you've passed this particular date. So I'm going to set mine for tomorrow. Right, so I can see now RE3 has now been created. And from here now, I need to email or alert those suppliers that this is ready. So I've still got my last opportunity to change the closing date. Once I'm happy here, again, you can see I've got my configure email template, so I can set that up. I can end my RFQ and I can either print or email. In this case, I'm just going to print, which will give me an SRS document of the particular, which I can set up, which will go out to the suppliers to tell them of the particular item I'm after. Now since I've restarted and not run a report, so this might take 2 seconds. And while I wait for that, I'm going to just log on to my portal. So this is, aside from Avanti, but running on the same architecture, my supply chain portal. So I can set up suppliers to log in here. So I have my particular user and a really complicated password. I'm going to log in. Okay, so that's now finished. Actually, I've got document preview off, so that's why I didn't actually see the information on there. So hopefully this logs in now. So you can see here again on the Power of Insights, we have our active quote requests. Let's click and have a look at that. So RE3 is the one I've just set up for stock code B100. And I can see when it's created and when I need to tender by. Against here, your supplier. So this is obviously your supplier who's interacting with SYSPRO here, not you, can fill in this information. So you can attach attachments to it, drawings, pictures of what you're requesting. So if you're going out for a bespoke engineering company, you might put a drawing in there, and you can put more richer notes in there to fill them in with more detail. I'm going to go into there and I'm going to fill in the price I'm going to tender for and the particular lead time it takes for the item, and click save. Okay, so it gives you a warning that I've still got till Friday to do it, so I can go back and change that up until Friday. And then when I look at my particular quote in action, I can see supplier 2, which is who I logged in as, has put a price of 300 and a lead time of 20 against this item. I'm still waiting for supplier 1 before I want to pick between the 2 items. Okay, what I'm going to quickly do now, because it strictly relies on the date for it to expire, so I cannot process that RFQ any further until it's expired. I'm going to run a quick script to change the expiry date backwards.
Cheating.
Cheating, I know. Don't do that.
For
Don't do
demo
what
purposes, it'll work.
Nick did. Yes. Okay. From there now, I'm going to have a look at my maintenance. Just before I do that, again, the supplier quote entry is available inside SYSPRO. So that same screen I did on the portal, if your supplier is a bit bitter and they don't want to log in, they can obviously send you an email and you can fill in that information against the RFQ yourself by using this program inside SYSPRO. I'm going to go into my quote maintenance now. And you can notice this button, before it wasn't available, now it is because I've passed my expiry date, I botched it. and I'm going to accept that quote, that supplier quote, because obviously supplier 1 didn't decide to fill it in. We won't be using them in the future. Okay, now that has been processed, it will, against my particular requisition, I think it's 223. Supplier 2, price 300, has now been filled in against it. The status has moved to approved, and everything is there ready to be raised as a purchase order through the standard requisition route. So I should now be able to see it inside here. So that is essentially how you can use the RFQ system to show the particular or get your suppliers to start tendering prices for your acquisitions. Like I say, to be able to use that, you need to have adopted or use the requisition system to process that. I think that concludes that little demo. Hopefully it's been useful.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for that. So what we've done is talk a little bit around some of the changes that we've had in the system for request for quotes, which is fundamentally the ability for you to automatically send a quotation, especially if you've got a robust requisition process. You now have a quick automated process. Fundamentally, we're still adhering to some of the basic business principles that we have associated with that, which is budgeting, pricing control. We're streamlining the procurement process and digitizing it by automating some of that functionality. And because you know that natural route of escalation, it really does simplify that decision making. It doesn't require you to walk down the hall to walk into someone's office to ask for that approval, because of course we can no longer do that. The system's automatically allowing you to do that, so you're not picking up the phone and calling them. And it's still adhering to governance, minimizing that risk of fraud. We looked at the supply chain portal as well, which allows you to engage and your suppliers to collaborate. That's the first iteration of the supplier portal, supply chain portal that we've introduced. It will continue to improve as we see more and more iterations of SYSPRO releases. The other element that I want to talk briefly about is the return to supplier, which is the other end of when goods come in. If you need to return something, SYSPRO has new functionality that's been added in that unfortunately we don't have time today to showcase. But fundamentally, it's a little piece of software that allows you to streamline your workflows and business processes when you have to return something that you may have found faulty, may have had an issue in transit. And if quality has inspected it, it improves your quality management as well to be able to sell that back. You've also got improved inventory management, and it takes care of the financial element of returning elements to the suppliers. So systematically, again, it's following the business process that you have set up. Now, we've gone through and talked quite a bit about changes in and around procurement and the supply chain. Fundamentally, though, with SYSPRO, we've also had quite a few changes that we've continued to add in that we haven't had a chance to talk about today. I want to highlight a few that I think the people on this call would be able to find useful, things that make it simpler to maintain and run. We looked a little bit earlier in a previous session around the lost and found warehouse, or rather the order picking cycle as well as cycle counting, which are elements of what happens physically on the warehouse floor. With the latest release, we've introduced the concept of a holding warehouse. If you have an item that someone on the shop floor cannot find, or if they found too much of, what you can do is have it in a holding area. They have the ability to go ahead and move that into the system into a lost and found warehouse, where the supervisor then has the ability to go ahead and action that and identify what's happening with it. So with that additional functionality, we've now been able to improve what we're delivering. We've improved our reporting functionality. We've also introduced for the SYSPRO clients, when you're used to working on two monitors, SYSPRO has a tendency of going ahead and just launching on the same monitor every time. In any new program you launch, you need to find yourself dragging it across your multiple monitors. And I know it's a tiny little thing, but I find that it's actually improved my engagement with the SYSPRO clients significantly with that multiple monitor support as it's been released in 2020 R1. There are a number of maintenance improvements that have been introduced into the system. If you are managing and doing maintenance on a particular company, you can go ahead and disable that. But if you wanted to do systematic maintenance and you wanted to prevent operators from logging into any company, you'd have to log into all of your SYSPRO companies to go ahead and do that. Now you can go ahead and automatically take care of that at a single global level rather than having to do it individually at a company level. We've introduced new functionality around when you're logging out users, the messaging that you're sending across to that. And this is something that happens traditionally once a year come renewal time. The way that you import in your license, we've just made it a lot easier for you to do that. Again, a little small touch, but it's going to make life a lot simpler. We talked about the lost and found. With the pick and the count, when you're going ahead and picking, if you find items that are missing, throw them in the lost and found. If you find more items than you're expecting in that particular bin, you don't need the person on the actual warehouse floor to make a decision. They can literally move it into that lost and found for future. So you're not stopping what they're doing. And the same thing if you're doing cycle counting, you have the ability to go ahead and transition that as well. Just with this simple little change in the system, what you're doing is increasing visibility of your inventory. You now got a better idea of what your holdings are, where they're sitting, and you're taking the load away from someone on the floor to someone that has perhaps the ability to make a decision as to whether that needs to be written off, pulled back in, because there are, of course, commercial implications associated with this. I promised to tell you a little bit about efficient reporting. With SYSPRO 8, because we've moved and transitioned over to Avanti and the web interface, we are looking at moving everyone to server-side printing. What we found is that users are used to going ahead and showing the reports as soon as they're completed. Whereas with server-side, historically, it would be added to the queue so that the user would continue working without being interrupted and waiting for that report. What you have the ability to do with the latest release is add it to the queue and then choose optionally to display it automatically as soon as it's completed. So you get the best of both worlds. The additional functionality that's been added in is if you've gone ahead and created a custom report, and on top of that, you've customized the form with parameters that you want your users to be able to input. They're tailored to your business. You have the ability to go ahead and run that report in Avanti as well with no interruption. So again, it's part of that Avanti journey we talked about earlier. The architectural changes, there's been so many, just touched on a few of those associated with the license management, the user. Fundamentally, what we're trying to do is drive improved efficiency and productivity. We're making it more scalable. We're improving the security and compliance. We're also making sure that people are able to see and have visibility, insight into what it is. And the reality is the people that are usually responsible for the care and feeding and the maintenance of SYSPRO also have a day job. This is not the only thing that they do. We need to make sure that it's efficient and there's time saved as you're processing those transactions. So you may already be on SYSPRO 8, you may be looking to go to SYSPRO 8, but fundamentally you want to go ahead and have the benefits of the upgrades and the updates as they're being introduced into the system. And the goal for today's session is really just to showcase what some of that new functionality is. So as you're moving forward into the new releases of SYSPRO, you're able to see what you can leverage without investing more in terms of new modules. You can just leverage what's already available as the new functionality becomes available to you. You're looking at increasing your productivity, your compliance, reducing your cost, driving your performance. Fundamentally, it's all of the benefits that you want to use by investing in SYSPRO and continuing with that. So we talked a lot about things that are introduced in the new version. Nick's showcased quite a bit of functionality for you, but you still have questions. You want to know more. So what we want to do is make sure that you know where to go. If you're already on 8, what you can do is click on F1, go to the SYSPRO help. You will be able to get additional information on the new functionality, as well as what else is available from a new feature set. The 8 microsite is a rich resource where you can go and see what's coming, what's already there. You can access the community preview to engage with SYSPRO if you want to go ahead and have a look and see at this lovely bicycle company that we have set up. And the SYSPRO Learning channel is available until May 2020, the end of May, for you to go ahead and access all the content. you're welcome to do so as well. It looks like we've covered everything relatively comprehensively today, Nick. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. Stay safe. And if there is anything that you do have from a question perspective, we'll share the PowerPoint as well as the recording with you afterwards. So feel free to drop us a line. But in the meantime, enjoy wherever you are, and hopefully everything continues to remain well. Thanks very much for joining us.